In linguistics, a stratum, a strate, is a language that influences, or is influenced by another through contact. A substratum, a substrate, is a language which has lower power of prestige than another, while a superstratum, a superstrate, is the language that has higher power of prestige. Both substratum and superstratum languages influence each other, but in different ways. An adstratum or adstrate refers to a language that is in contact with another language in a neighbor population without having identifiably higher or lower prestige. The notion of strata has first been developed by the Italian linguist Grazia di Ascoli, and became known in the English-speaking world by two different authors in 1932. Thus, both terms refer to a situation where an intrusive language establishes itself in the territory of another, typically as the result of migration. Whether the superstratum case of the substratum one applies will normally only be evident after several generations, during which the intrusive language exists within a diaspora culture. In order for the intrusive language to persist, the immigrant population will either need to take the position of a political elite or immigrate in significant numbers relative to the local population. The superstratum case refers to migratory elite populations which eventually adopt the local language. Substratum. A substratum, a substrate, is a language that influences an intrusive language that supplants it. The term is also used of substrate interference, i.e., the influence the substratum language exerts on the replacing language. According to some classifications, this is one of three main types of linguistic interference. Substratum interference differs from both adstratum, which involves no language replacement but rather mutual borrowing between languages of equal value, and superstratum, which refers to the influence a socially dominating language has on another receding language that might eventually be relegated to the status of a substratum language. In a typical case of substrate interference, a language A occupies a given territory and another language B arrives in the same territory. Language B then begins to supplant language A. The speakers of language A abandon their own language in favor of the other language, generally because they believe that it will help them achieve certain goals within government, the workplace, and in social settings. During the language shift, however, the receding language A still influences language B. One example of a substrate language is Gaulish, from the ancient Celtic people the Gauls. The Gauls lived in the modern French-speaking territory before the arrival of the Romans, namely the invasion of Julius Caesar's army. Given the cultural, economic and political advantages that came with being a Latin speaker, the Gauls eventually abandoned the language in favor of the language brought to them by the Romans, which evolved in this region until eventually it took the form of the French language that is known today. The Gaulish speech disappeared, but remnants of its vocabulary survive in some French words as well as place names of Gaulish origin. Another example is the influence of the now extinct North Germanic Norn language on the Scots dialects of the Shetland and Orkney Islands. In the Arab Middle East and North Africa, colloquial Arabic dialects, most especially Levantine, Egyptian, and Maghreb dialects, often exhibit significant substrata from other regional Semitic, Iranian, and Berber languages. Linguistic substrata may be difficult to detect, especially if the substrate language and its nearest relatives are extinct. For example, the earliest form of the Germanic languages may have been influenced by a non-Indo-European language, purportedly the source of about 1/4 of the most ancient Germanic vocabulary. There are similar arguments for a Sanskrit substrate and a Greek one. Typically, Creole languages have multiple substrata, with the actual influence of such languages being indeterminate. Superstratum. A superstratum, a superstrate, offers a counterpart to a substratum. When one language succeeds another, linguists label the succeeding language a superstratum and the earlier language a substratum. A superstrate may also represent an imposed linguistic element akin to what occurred with English Norman after the Norman conquest of 1066, when use of the English language carried low prestige. The international scientific vocabulary coinages from Greek and Latin roots adopted by European languages to describe scientific topics can also be termed a superstratum, although for this last case, adstratum might be a better designation. In the case of French, for example, Latin is the superstrate and Gaulish the substrate. Some linguists contend that Japanese consists of an Altaic superstratum projected onto an Austronesian substratum. Some scholars also argue for the existence of Altaic superstrate influences on varieties of Chinese spoken in northern China. In this case, however, the superstratum refers to influence, not language succession. Alternate views detect substrate effects. Adstratum. An adstratum or adstrate is a language which through its prestige is a source of lexical borrowings to another. Generally, the term is used about languages in particular geolinguistic or geopolitical contexts. For example, early in England's history, Old Norse contributed an adstrate to the lexical structure of Old English. The phenomenon is less common today in standardized linguistic varieties and more common in colloquial forms of speech, since modern nations tend to favor one single linguistic variety over others. In India, where dozens of languages are widespread, many languages could be said to share an adstratal relationship, but Hindi is certainly a dominant adstrate in North India. A different example would be the sociolinguistic situation in Belgium, where the French and Dutch languages have roughly the same status, and could justifiably be called adstrates to each other, having each one provided a remarkable set of lexical specifications to the other. The term is also used to identify systematic influences or a layer of borrowings in a given language from another language independently of whether the two languages continue coexisting as separate entities. Many modern languages have an appreciable adstratum from English due to the economic preponderance of the United States on international markets. The Greek and Latin coinages adopted by European languages to describe scientific topics are also justifiably called adstrata. Another example is found in Spanish and Portuguese, which contain a heavy Semitic adstratum, and Yiddish, which is a linguistic variety of High German with adstrata from Hebrew and Aramaic, mostly in the sphere of religion, and Slavic languages. By reason of the geopolitical context, Yiddish-speaking villages lived through for centuries before disappearing during the Holocaust. Notable examples of substrate or superstrate influence